Executive schedule refers to the system of salaries given to the highest-ranked appointed positions in the executive branch of the U.S. government. The President of the United States, an elected official, appoints incumbents to these positions, most of them with the advice and consent of the Senate. They include members of the President's cabinet as well as other subcabinet policymakers. There are 5 pay rates within the executive schedule, usually denoted with a Roman numeral, with I being the highest level and V the lowest. Congress lists the positions eligible for the executive schedule and the corresponding level. Congress also gives the President the ability to grant executive schedule 4 and V status to no more than 34 employees not listed in the law. The executive schedule is linked to the rates of pay for the general schedule, senior executive service, senior level, senior foreign service, and other federal civilian pay systems, as well as the pay of uniformed military personnel. Because various federal laws establishing those pay systems normally tie the maximum amount payable to various levels of the executive schedule. Calculation of pay rate. However, many political appointees have had the pay rate frozen at low levels. According to 5 U.S.C. Section 5318, at the beginning of the first pay period for any position under the executive schedule, the amount of pay will be adjusted and rounded to the nearest multiple of $100. If this amount is found to midway between multiples of $100, then it will be rounded to the next highest multiple of $100. Presidential authority to place positions at levels IV and V. For 5 U.S.C. Section 5317, the President can at any time appoint no more than 34 individuals to pay rates level 4 and V, provided that they are viewed as a necessary change to organization, management responsibility, or workload within a specific agency. This figure is in addition to level 4 and V positions specifically authorized in the bill. However, Senate consent is required and the pay rate takes effect only upon a new appointment to the position. All actions taken during this process are to be published in the Federal Register, except when it is deemed that such publication would stand in conflict to national security. The President may not take action under this section with respect to a position, the pay for which is fixed at a specific rate by this subchapter, or by statute enacted after the 14th of August 1964. The following positions are granted Level 4 pay status of the Executive Schedule: Counselor to the Secretary, United States Department of the Treasury; Deputy Undersecretary for International Labor Affairs, United States Department of Labor; Administrator of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration; Executive Secretary of the National Security Council; Administrator of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention; Assistant Secretary of the Air Force; Director of the Office for Victims of Crime; Director of the Bureau of Justice Assistance; Director of the National Institutes of Health; members of the Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board; Commissioner on Aging, now Assistant Secretary for Aging, Department of Health and Human Services. The following positions are granted Level 5 pay status: Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Reserve Affairs, Department of Defense; Counselor to the Secretary of Labor, Department of Labor; Deputy Undersecretary for Education, Department of Education; Commissioner of the Administration for Native Americans. Level 1 5 U.S.C. Section 5312 lists the positions that received the amount of pay determined by Chapter 11 of Title II. Since January 2016, the annual rate of pay for Level 1 is $205,700. There exist 21 positions, which are as follows: Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, Attorney General, Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary of Transportation, United States Trade Representative, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Secretary of Homeland Security, Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Commissioner of the Social Security Administration, Director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Director of National Intelligence, Level 2, 5 U.S.C. Section 5313 lists 46 positions given the rank of Executive Schedule 2. Deputy Secretaries of Cabinet-level agencies usually have this rank. Since January 2016, the annual rate of pay for Level 2 is $185,100. While not listed at, the Deputy Secretary of Commerce also is at Level 2 of the Executive Schedule. The positions are: Department of Agriculture Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, Department of Defense Deputy Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Air Force, Under Secretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology and Logistics, Department of Education Deputy Secretary of Education, Department of Energy Deputy Secretary of Energy, Executive Office of the President Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Chief Performance Officer of the United States and Deputy OMB Director for Management, Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisers, Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, Deputy Director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, Director of the Office of White House Mail and Messenger Operations, Department of Health and Human Services Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services, Department of Homeland Security Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, Under Secretary of Homeland Security for Management, Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Department of Housing and Urban Development Deputy Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Intelligence Community Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Director of the National Counterterrorism Center, Director of the National Counterproliferation Center, Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Department of the Interior Deputy Secretary of the Interior, Department of Justice Deputy Attorney General, Department of Labor Deputy Secretary of Labor, National Aeronautics and Space Administration Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Department of State Deputy Secretary of State, Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources, Department of Transportation Deputy Secretary of Transportation, Under Secretary of Transportation for Security, Under Secretary of Transportation for Policy, Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, Administrator of the Federal Highway Administration, Department of the Treasury Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, USAID Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, Department of Veterans Affairs Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Other Independent Agencies Director of the United States Office of Personnel Management, Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, Deputy Commissioner of the Social Security Administration, Administrator of the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund, Chief Executive Officer of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, Boards and Commissions Chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Director of the National Science Foundation, Independent Members and Chairman Thrift Depositor Protection Oversight Board, Members of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, Director of the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, Level 3, 5 U.S.C. Section 5314 lists 127 positions granted the rank of Level 3. Since January 2016, the annual rate of pay for Level 3 is $170,400. The positions are: Department of Agriculture Under Secretary of Agriculture for Farm and Foreign Agricultural Services, Under Secretary of Agriculture for Food, Nutrition and Consumer Services, Under Secretary of Agriculture for Natural Resources and Environment, Under Secretary of Agriculture for Research, Education and Economics, Under Secretary of Agriculture for Food Safety, Under Secretary of Agriculture for Marketing and Regulatory Programs, Under Secretary of Agriculture for Rural Development, Department of Commerce Under Secretary of Commerce, Under Secretary of Commerce for Economic Affairs, Under Secretary of Commerce for Export Administration, Under Secretary of Commerce for Travel and Tourism, Under Secretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere and Administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Under Secretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property and Director of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, Under Secretary of Commerce for Technology, Department of Defense Under Secretary of Defense for Policy, Under Secretary of Defense, Under Secretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, Under Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Deputy Chief Management Officer, Under Secretary of the Air Force, Under Secretary of the Army, Under Secretary of the Navy, Deputy Under Secretary of Defense for Acquisition and Technology, Deputy Under Secretary of Defense for Logistics and Material Readiness, Department of Education Under Secretary of Education, Department of Energy Under Secretary of Energy for Energy and Environment, Under Secretary of Energy for Nuclear Security, Under Secretary of Energy for Science, Executive Office of the President, Deputy Trade Representatives, Office of the United States Trade Representative, Chief Agricultural Negotiator, Office of the United States Trade Representative, Administrator for Federal Procurement Policy, Administrator, Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, Office of Management and Budget, Administrator, Office of Electronic Government, Controller, Office of Federal Financial Management, Office of Management and Budget, Deputy Director for Demand Reduction, Office of National Drug Control Policy, Deputy Director for Supply Reduction, Office of National Drug Control Policy, Deputy Director for State and Local Affairs, Office of National Drug Control Policy, Department of Health and Human Services Administrator, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Department of Homeland Security Under Secretaries of Homeland Security, Director, Bureau of Citizenship and Immigration Services, Commissioner, Customs and Border Protection, Deputy Administrators, Federal Emergency Management Agency, Intelligence Community Deputy Directors of Central Intelligence, Department of Justice United States Solicitor General, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Justice, United States Associate Attorney General, Administrator, Drug Enforcement Administration, Department of Justice, National Aeronautics and Space Administration Deputy Administrator, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Department of State Under Secretaries of State, Department of Transportation Administrator, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Administrator, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Administrator, Federal Railroad Administration, Administrator, United States Maritime Administration, Administrator, Federal Transit Administration, Administrator, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, Administrator, Research and Innovative Technology Administration, Department of the Treasury Under Secretaries of the Treasury, Controller of the Currency, Commissioner of Internal Revenue, Director, Office of Financial Research. Note: the Director of the Office of Thrift Supervision was Level 3 before that office was abolished by the Dodd-Frank Act of 2010. U.S.AID Deputy Administrator, Agency for International Development, Department of Veterans Affairs under Secretary of Veterans Affairs for Health, Department of Veterans Affairs under Secretary of Veterans Affairs for Benefits, Department of Veterans Affairs under Secretary of Veterans Affairs for Memorial Affairs, Department of Veterans Affairs. Other independent agencies: Administrator, General Services Administration, Administrator, Small Business Administration, Director, Peace Corps, Deputy Director, National Science Foundation, President of the Export-Import Bank of the United States, Director, Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, President, Overseas Private Investment Corporation, Governor, Farm Credit Administration, Deputy Director, Office of Personnel Management, Director, Institute for Scientific and Technological Cooperation, Executive Director, Property Review Board, Deputy Administrator, Environmental Protection Agency, Archivist of the United States, Executive Director, Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board, Director, Trade and Development Agency, Director, Office of Government Ethics, Register of Copyrights, Director, Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, Chief Executive Officer, International Clean Energy Foundation. Boards and Commissions: Chairman, Merit Systems Protection Board, Chairman, Federal Communications Commission, Chairman, Board of Directors, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, Chairman, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Chairman, Federal Trade Commission, Chairman, Surface Transportation Board, Chairman, National Labor Relations Board, Chairman, Securities and Exchange Commission, Chairman, National Mediation Board, Chairman, Railroad Retirement Board, Chairman, Federal Maritime Commission, Chairman, National Transportation Safety Board, Chairman, National Endowment for the Arts, Chairman, National Endowment for the Humanities, Chairman, Postal Regulatory Commission, Chairman, Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission, Chairman, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Chairman, Consumer Product Safety Commission, Chairman, Commodity Futures Trading Commission, Chairman, United States International Trade Commission, Chairman, Federal Mine Safety and Health Review Commission, Chairman, National Credit Union Administration Board, Chairman, Federal Housing Finance Board. Members: Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board. Members: Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Obsolete positions: Director of the Office of Emergency Planning, Executive Secretary, National Space Council.